Hey, what up? This is Chef, Rainy Days Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be discussing a double murder, the Libya beach murders. I'm talking about 2014, the 2nd of January, when Mark Desales and Lynn Howie got shot on the beach. Anyway, let's get into the case. Rainy Days Podcast. This podcast is going to discuss a double shooting that took place on the 2nd of January 2014 on a secluded beach just outside the Melita oil base complex. The closest town is Zuwara, Libya. This podcast is not suitable for children. So what actually happened? What do we know happened? Well, on that fateful day when Lynn Howie and Mark Desales would meet their end, they both got shot on the beach. Motives very unclear. Well, anyway, from the information I've gathered from the far corners of the internet goes as follows. Lynn Howie and Mark Desales both got 2 headshots lying in the golden sand on the beach outside the Melita oil and gas complex, owned by Italian oil and gas company ENI. 9mm bullet shells were found at the scene. Also, partial tire prints, although I'm not certain that casts were made by crime scene detectives at the time. Sydney Morning Herald and other news sites I have read say 4 people were arrested the same day as the murders in Sabratha, but this information was secondhand from Libya news media. What England and New Zealand were not told, and the people were arrested and let go the same day for reasons unknown. Neither the victims were robbed or sexually assaulted. Their Toyota was parked nearby and nobody messed with it. Lynn Howie and Mark Desales were having a picnic when they were execution shot in the back of their heads by persons or persons unknown. This case is 7 years old, so it's a cold case. It's going to be hard to solve, and I don't think is even being actively investigated at the time of making this podcast. But someone out there knows what happened. It is, however, possible that whoever done this major crime has since fled the country to beat the rap. Or they could be currently jailed on other charges. Or they could be locals just living in the nearby town of Sabratha or Zuwara. The Sydney Morning Herald reports 9mm bullet shells found at the murder scene, so we know that the killers had probably Glock 9mm handguns or other guns capable of firing 9mm ammunition. We can also fairly safely assume that they were driving a 4-wheel drive because the beach was 4-wheel drive access only. Now some background on Lynn Howie and Mark Desales. Who was Lynn Howie? Lynn Howie was an English lady. Now, she's a New Zealand citizen and has kids in New Zealand, but originally her birth country is England. She spoke with an English accent. I just wanted to clear that up because a lot of websites say New Zealand a full stop. Anyway, she volunteered for Wellington Free Ambulance, assisting people experiencing alcohol-related harm in Wellington City CBD, often late on Friday night and Saturday night. Lynn Howie was studying to be a nurse. Lynn Howie was ex-New Zealand Defence Force. So who was Mark Desales then? Well, Mark Desales was an ex-RAF officer. That's Royal Air Force. Mark was married to a lady named Karen, who was also used to live with him in Libya. The two were divorced before Mark travelled to New Zealand and bought a house with his new girlfriend Lynn Howie. Most recently, he worked for First Engineering as a power manager, bringing generators to Tripoli, the capital of Libya. Mark Desales was from Shefford, Bedfordshire. Now I'm going to discuss some theories on what may have happened on the 2nd of January 2014 at the Melita oil and gas complex beach. Theory number 1. They were killed by members of Islamic State, specifically ISIL, which means Islamic State of Iraq, Syria, and Libya. But, ISIS, ISIL, IS, Islamic State, it's all, under the same umbrella, really. So anyway, members of ISIS come across Lynn Howie and Mark Desales by chance and shoot them both. They may have thought they were spies for USA. May have just killed them because they were white people in a double murder. Says white people are not welcome to interfere in Libya. They may have thought that Mark and Lynn were disrespectful for not wearing a hijab and following local customs, etc. I've read heaps on the net that this was a totally motiveless crime. This is not true. I agree that the motive is hard to pinpoint from the information available, but if we can figure out the motive, then I'm one step closer to finding out who did this. And ISIS were active in Libya in 2014. In the article, ISIS storms Libya security office, beheads 12. CBS News, 24th of February 2016, says ISIS killed 19 people in Sabrata, which is close to Melita oil base, beheading 12 of them, 2 years and 1 month after Lynn and Mark got killed. So they're definitely capable of a double murder. Not just that, the persons or people who did this, they weren't first-time gangsters. That's why they didn't take their vehicles or even rob them that we know of. The evidence doesn't bear the hallmarks of some teenagers who decided to commit their first murder. ISIS would do this just to let Libyan security forces know that they can't always protect people from harm. It's likely the killers have criminal records for more violent crimes, up to and including murder. Alright, theory number 2. They were killed by people traffickers. The Libyan coastline, especially near and around Zuwara, is a hotbed for migrants to cross to Europe. So we know people traffickers are active in the area. Migrants from far corners of Africa are smuggled through a network of people traffickers to be sent on fishing boats to Italy, Europe, etc. But why would people traffickers kill Lynn, Howie and Mark Desales? And possibly they thought they would give information to police, the Libyan Coast Guard, law enforcement, etc. Some websites say they may have been mistaken for spies. I looked into this and they weren't spies. The only thing to point to that is Lynn, Howie and Mark Desales were both ex-military. But if they were truly spies, they would have told friends and family they were going to Germany or something. They wouldn't post their location on Facebook, etc. Basically, the evidence just doesn't pinpoint to that kind of thing at all. The killers may have thought they were spies, though. ISIS and people traffickers would both hate spies. Also, ISIS has been known to pay people traffickers to send members to Europe, to start sleeper cells and stuff like that. Well, that's just it. Any of these theories could be what happened, or just a number of contributing factors to what really happened. I don't know who shot Lynn, Howie and Mark Desales, but someone does. Anyone watching this video who heard something, knows something, or even saw something, I ask that you tell the Libyan cops. Also, contact the British Foreign Office, Scotland Yard, etc., also the New Zealand Police and MFAT. I think the real killers, 4 of them were arrested the same day and let go. Maybe because they were from connected families. Could be as simple as they just paid a bribe. The local cops may have been scared to prosecute them. Of course, they may have been let go because they really didn't do it. But if that's the case, then why were they arrested? Did they fit a description? If so, who saw what? Were they caught with firearms? Did they have a 9mm Glock pistol or another gun that shoots 9mm ammo? New Zealand Herald, 5th of January 2014 says, local news source Libya Al Hurar reported that 4 people have been arrested in connection with the killings. Alright, theory number 3. Mark Desales was the target and Lynn Howie was just there, so she too was shot dead. I mean, Mark lived 6 years in Libya, and Lynn had just arrived, so it doesn't make sense that she was the target. I'm going to come back to this theory later on because there's much to discuss, so I want to come back to it. 4. My 4th theory on what happened on the 2nd of January 2014. Lynn Howie and Mark Desales were shot in some kind of gang initiation, similar to the Thailand beach murders. I don't think this one's likely what happened, but it's plausible. Around the world, criminals do commit major crimes together as part of some sick culture of being hard and to prove that they're 100% loyal to the gang. Could this be what happened to Lynn and Mark Desales? Well, possible. Number 5, it was a robbery gone wrong. This would be more possible, but the evidence doesn't point in this direction. Their belongings were untouched. Their Toyota car wasn't stolen. There was also no evidence of sex crimes, ruling that out as the motive. But they could have potentially started with the idea of robbing them, and then for whatever reason they got spooked and just left without robbing them. I mean, it's not entirely impossible. It's just, well, the evidence doesn't really point in that direction. It's probably not the case. Anyway, number 6. This one's unlikely, but they could have been killed by a serial killer, like a Libya version of the .44 caliber killer. Some weirdo lone wolf guy who hates to see a happy couple shoots them down. Although 1, 2, and 3 are most likely, any theory is possible. Maybe something I never thought of went down that day. I mean, I wasn't there. Just doing the best I can from New Zealand. If anyone watching this podcast speaks Arabic, please translate this podcast word for word and upload it to YouTube in Arabic, because most people in Libya speak Arabic, not English. Also, any true crime podcast, please make episodes about this double murder. Eleanor Neal, Georgia Marie, Kendall Ray, you ladies have much bigger platforms than me. Make episodes about the Lynn, Howie, Mark Desales murders, as to bring more awareness to the case. Anyway, back to theory number 3. Mark Desales was the target. I would have put this at number 1, except the crime scene was unusual. I mean, if Mark Desales had enemies, how did they know to hit him at the beach just outside the Melita oil and gas base? I mean, just out of the town of Zawara. How did they know that? Well, unless he was double-crossed, information was given to his enemies, but by who, why, where, and how? People may have just overheard Mark and Lynn talking at a restaurant, saying where they were going. I mean, I would say at a bar, but I don't know how many bars they've got in Libya. I mean, it's a vast majority Muslim country. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. Who would want Mark Desales dead, and what was their motive? The answer is I have no idea. It's very difficult to find information on Mark's life in Libya online. All I know is that he was married to a woman named Karen for a number of years. They were divorced before he met up with Lynn Howie, who herself was recently divorced. Although he lived in Libya for 6 years, Mark was really into travelling the whole world. He was an ex-RAF, so ex-military background. I read one article that said Mark used to work for his brother, who was high up in the oil industry. His article was interesting, however, I've been unable to find it again. The facts are few and far between in this case. Best I can put together from New Zealand is a patchy view on what may have happened that day. Most recently, I've read Mark being referred to as a power manager and in charge of supporting generators to Tripoli in order to help the Libyan people who lived in places where infrastructure is limited. Mark could have been in the targets of a business associate who lost out financially because of a deal falling through. Although highly likely the people who killed Mark and Lynn were Arabs, cannot rule out that expats may be involved too. Did Lynn Howie and Mark Desales ever work at the Melita oil and gas complex owned by Italian company E&I? Maybe that's how Mark knew about this obscure beach. Either that or Mark Desales and Lynn Howie were supposed to meet someone there, and they were set up. I reckon it would be some turn of bad luck if Mark's enemies just turned up armed and shot him and his girlfriend in an out-of-the-way four-wheel drive access beach. But they may have also been followed. Pictures on a digital camera found at the scene showed Lynn and Mark visiting the Roman ruins, Sabrata, which isn't far from the Libya town of Sabrata, were the killers following them the whole time? There's a 1-minute speech on YouTube by a chief of police in Sabrata, but it's in Arabic and I'm not sure what it actually says. There's one thing to bring up again. The 4 people who were arrested the same day, I feel like that's the direction the cops should be looking. One more thing. Mark Desales worked for an oil company when Colonel Gaddafi was in power, before the Arab Spring. This alone makes him the enemy of ISIS and other extremist groups operating in Libya. Regardless of how Mark saw it, that's how it would have looked. Anyone working for the government before Gaddafi fell, that's like working for Gaddafi, or even just some company in Libya, or it could be looked at like that. Well, anyway, that's all the information I could find. So unfortunately, this video ends here for now. Anyone who knows who done this double shooting, call the British Foreign Office, Scotland Yard, New Zealand cops, and the police in Libya. Well, that's the best I can do for you, Lynn. A side note. Hi, my name's Chef, and I actually knew Lynn Howie. Although I never met Mark Desales, I'm sure he was a great guy. I mean, Lynn obviously loved him a lot. They owned property in Wellington, New Zealand, and were setting up a fantastic life together of travel, romance, and happy living. Two people finally get to where they want to be in life, and it's all cut short. A black storm cloud of rage and gunshots comes to the sun-bleached sand in a four-wheel drive, bringing murder to the happy couple. That's why I made this podcast, because this case is everything that's wrong with the world rolled into one. Lynn Howie wasn't a close friend of mine, but I knew her because we were on a course together. Lynn Howie was cool.